Thank you, Cora. Before beginning our program this evening, I would like to acknowledge in gratitude to the Indigenous people on whose traditional territories I live, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and Mississauga of New Credit in Toronto Treaty 13. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first of our four-part series to examine the Ethiopian experience, brought to you by the Engaging in Education Committee in conjunction with the Schulwide and the Anti-Racism Committees here at Beth David. We are excited to learn about the history, the culture, the food, and the challenges of the efforts to integrate into Israeli society encountered by this courageous group of Jews who thought that they were alone in this world of ours. My name is Barbara Kochberg, and along with Heather Katzman-Goldberg, my co-chair, it is my honor tonight to introduce Dr. Mary Getty, who was born in Ethiopia and made Aliyah to Israel at the age of 9 in 1991, shortly before Operation Solomon. It was in Israel where he first attended school and then went on to complete medical school at the Ben Gurion University in the Negev, followed by a residency in otolaryngology in the head and neck surgery department at the Sharet Tzedek Medical Center in Jerusalem. His personal story is part of the history of an entire community. Now let us hear from Dr. Getty himself as he shares with us his incredible journey from a small village in Ethiopia to being halfway through a 2-year medical fellowship right here at Mount Sinai Hospital, where he is pursuing his specialty of sinus and skull-based surgery in the area of head and neck oncology. We will have everybody muted while Dr. Getty shares the details of his adventures, and then we will give you the opportunity to ask questions. Please submit your questions to Heather Katzman-Goldberg through the chat box. Dr. Getty, please.
Hi, good evening, and hi everyone. Shalom and good evening for all of you. And thank you very much, Barbara, for your presentation and introduction. I'm very excited to be here. And as Barbara mentioned, so I'm currently a clinical fellow at the Mount Sinai Hospital. I came for a 2 years fellowship program in the field of head and neck cancer and skull-based and sinus surgeries. And today, what I want to share with you my personal story that starts in little village in northern Ethiopia and continue in my life in Israel and nowadays in Canada. At the same time, to present you the story of the Ethiopian Jewish community and our long struggle to be part of the Israeli society. So my objective will be a couple things. First of all, is to talk a bit in general about Ethiopia and how the Jewish community, the Jewish community got to Ethiopia, and to bit details about Ethiopia in general, and then about maybe to show you some picture about the village in the north of Ethiopia named Machad. I was born, and I have the privilege of going to visit over there after 20 years in Israel. I went to visit Ethiopia, and a bit to show you picture, just to give you some notion about what is meaning to be born in a little village. Afterward, I would like to speak about a bit about the origin of Ethiopia, how in the first place the Jewish community came to Ethiopia and try to understand. And then maybe to go to the other section about our previous, before the establishment of the state of Israel, and afterward our struggle to make Aliyah, to immigrate to Israel, and how many difficult it was during those process, and then a bit to talk about my life in Israel. So just a bit background about Ethiopia. So it's a country located in the east of Africa. It's ancient country with a lot of history, and this is one of the African country that was not fully colonized during the European colonize of Africa, and this is the second populated country in Africa, and the main religion in this country is Christianity. And I mention all those details because then we get to the Jewish story about Ethiopia. And we are talking about a community that was exist in Ethiopia 1,000 years, and they were located in two areas of Ethiopia. Can you see my mouse, my marking? So basically, majority of the Jewish lived in two big communities. One community located in the area called Gondar, and the other community lived in area called Tigray, and both of them are located in the north of Ethiopia, in this area where I'm pointing, where our reference area is Addis Ababa, that's located in the center of Ethiopia. This is the capital city of Ethiopia. And the second part is, I was born in Ethiopia in a little village, as I mentioned, called Macha. This is located in the province of Gondar. And in 2011, after 20 years of being in Israel, I spoke with my father, and he told me that maybe it's going to be a nice opportunity to go there and to see where is the area that we are coming from. I made Aliyah in the age of 9 to Israel. So part of the place I remember from my imagination, and part from the story of what my father was telling us. And you can see that this is the area that my family used to live. And even in 2011, in order to get to my village that was named Macha, there was no transportation. In the same way, we didn't have in our village electricity and no running water, of course. And you can see here this white roof. This is used to be my family's house, and part of the field that you can see here. My father was farmer, or belonged to my family. And I would like you to take a close look at this picture, because this is really remind me. We can see here two kids in the age, I think 7 or 8, and what they are doing, they have responsibility to keep all those cows and make sure that the number of cows that they are taking in the morning will be back in the evening. And I'm very connected to this picture because this is what I was doing in their age, in the age of 7 and 8. And I was a shepherd, and with my older sister went to keep on sheep and cows. And of course, in those times, going to school was not a privilege that anyone has. And only people that were rich or something like that could afford to go to school. And this is, I show you before our house. So this is the way our house was look like. You can see here, this is my father, and this is my brother. And you can compare and see and those are non-Jewish people who used to be friend of my father. And actually, this was pretty amazing. 20 years that they haven't see us at all. And just by surprise, we just came and saw us and saw them. And those are the people who are living now in our house that used to be. And you can see how the house is built. They are built from wood and mud. And this was really very simple life. In the other, on the other side, you can see here the capital city of Addis Ababa that is considered as modern city with electricity and everything. But I mentioned that because we have to understand that the Jewish community in Ethiopia, in intention, she's choosing to live in far away in the mountains because they wanted to keep their identity. I mean, they didn't want to assimilate in the general, the non-Jewish community that exists in across Ethiopia. Because of that, they choose in purpose to live high in the mountains and to be isolated in order to be able to keep their identity in this big country. And now I am getting to the second question that's interesting is how in the first place the Jewish community get from Eretz Israel, from the land of Israel, and how they get to this area of Ethiopia. We heard about Jewish communities that's located in Europe and even in Northern Africa and also in America, but how Jewish in the first place, the Ethiopian Jewish community got to Ethiopia. So to explain that, there is some theory in order to explain that, starting from the story that's mentioned in the Bible, Sefer Melachim, that talks about the meeting that was between King Solomon and Queen Sheba. And the story goes by that they have son, and their son came to visit King Solomon in Jerusalem, and then he took some part of the Bnei Israel back to Ethiopia. And the story talks about that we are the offspring of the tribe of Dan. That was one of the 12 tribes. And the theory talks about that after the destruction of the first temple, the Jewish went from Egypt, and if you go across the Blue Nile, we get to the area of Gondar and Tigray where the Jewish community were located. But those are the theory to try to explain how the Jewish in the first place they got to this area. And interesting, and I think this is very important in the Jewish community, in the Ethiopian Jewish community, is the names, and the names have a lot of meaning. So in Ethiopia, we called ourselves Beta Israel, not the Jewish of Ethiopia, not Ethiopian Jewish. Our name was Beta Israel, meaning Bet Israel. And interesting, the non-Jewish called us Falasha. And in Amharic, the meaning of Falasha, it means someone who is not belong here. And the saying was, you are Jewish, you are not belong here. And this was the name that we both called. And I think Barbara mentioned that, and interesting, till the 19th centuries, for a lot of years, the Jewish of Ethiopia were sure that they were the last Jewish that left in the entire world. And I will bring a story that really shows how when the first European person came from Europe to a Jewish village in Ethiopia, the Jewish community was very surprised. They say, it's unbelievable because the Jewish are supposed to look like us. How we can tell? And this was really surprising. And this has come from the situation where we didn't have any connection to other Jewish community across Europe or other Jewish community in the diaspora of the Jewish. And this is the reason why I call it, we practice our Judaism a bit different, let's say, from the classical way, how the entire Jewish conducting and in respect to halacha and things like that, where our practice of Judaism really close to what is written in the Bible. And this is example of how our Torah, how our Bible was look like. You can see here, it's not written in Hebrew, it's written in Amharic letter. And interesting, it's also in a language called Ge'ez. This is ancient language that only our rabbis, which we are calling them Kesim, knew this language. So during Shabbat, let's say, for example, the case was reading from the Oraita, from the Bible, and then next to him stand another person who translate everything to us in Amharic. And I think another interesting aspect that exists only in the Ethiopian Jewish community and not exists in the entire Jewish world is another holiday that we call it Sigd. I don't know if any of you heard about the Sigd, but this is a holiday that really celebrate only in the Beta Israel community, in our community. And this is a real picture taken from the holiday itself. And this is a very holiday in which, in this day, a lot of Jewish community were gathered together and they were climbing a mountain. And this is resemble the Mount Sinai, and the re-engagement that we have between us and God. And one of the important things about this holiday, that it's always in the end of this holiday, the blessing was Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim Abniya. So merit, this holiday also all the time keep our dream that eventually we will be able to leave Ethiopia and go back to Eretz Israel. And I want now to pass to the, I think, to the other level, and this is to start to talk about the struggle that we make to make Aliyah. And I would like to talk about the year of 1862, when one of the famous Kesim, one of the famous rabbi that was in our community, his name was Abba Mahari, and he was a chief rabbi, very respectable. And after 40 years of learning Torah, he came to his community. He was the chief of the Kesim, the rabbi, and he's coming to his community and told them that he has a vision. And in his vision, he was told that the galut, the exile, is supposed to be end, and the time to go to Eretz Israel is arrived. And again, I'm talking about 1862, and this is the time where he gathered a lot of people from the Beta Israel Ethiopian Jewish community, and they are starting a journey from Ethiopia by foot toward Eretz Israel. And they are walking something like a month, and eventually they get to some river that they are not able to cross. And then they are approaching Abba Mahari and they are asking, what can we do? We cannot go from here. And what he's told him is that the same way that God, when the people of Israel left Egypt, opened the sea, the same thing will happen to them. And they are praying, and part of the people even jump to the water. And unfortunately, of course, the miracle of getting out from Egypt didn't happen, but we can see here the first attempt of the Jewish community in Ethiopia in order to come to Eretz Israel. So the story of Abba Mahari left really a big impression in our community. And the next event that I want to mention, it's in 1867, where a person named Professor Yosef Halevi, he's a European person who was sent by the Jewish community in Europe. He was sent in a mission to go to Ethiopia to look after the Jewish, and to try to understand really what is the rumor about Jews that are living in Ethiopia. And he is describing in his diary that he is doing a very long journey in order to get to Ethiopia. And after a lot of efforts, he was able to come to and locate a Jewish village. And then he came to the rabbi and tell them, hello, I'm Jewish just like you, and I came with a mission from the European Jews to meet you. And he described that in that moment, the case stepped back and told them, no, what you are telling, it's a lie, because Jews are supposed to be like us. They look like they're black, look like Ethiopian. There is no any other Jews in the entire world. And he described how Yosef Alevi described how he was frustrated from this answer, because he was doing so much effort, but only after 3 times coming and trying to convince him, eventually he was able to be in connection with him. And afterward, his student, Jacob Fatolovich, those are the figures who establish really the connection between the Jewish isolated community in Ethiopia and the entire world around. And I mentioned that before, what happened that the state of Israel was established in 1948, and the natural things that was supposed to happen is in the same in that moment is that the Jewish community in Ethiopia that really wanted to come to Eretz Israel, this was the opportunity for them to come. But what has happened, and I mentioned that before, because of the a bit different way that we practice our Judaism, there was a big discussion in the Jewish world whether we are real Jewish or not, and there was a big discussion about that. Of course, in our perspective, this is, I don't want to say unfair, but a weird discussion because we make so much effort to keep our identity, but eventually what happened is that in 1973, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef is announcing that the law of return that exists in the state of Israel also apply in the Jewish, in the Ethiopian Jewish, and then we have to do efforts in order to bring them to Israel. And then we're getting to the understanding what's going on with the immigration to Israel, to make the Aliyah to Eretz Israel. And we know that in nowadays to go from Ethiopia from Israel to Ethiopia, it's 4 hours flight, and then you are in Ethiopia. But what's happened in the 80s is that the regime in Ethiopia that was ruled by a dictator named Haile Mariam didn't let anyone leave Ethiopia without permission. I mean, the Jews of Ethiopia wanted to go to Israel, but they were not able because the regime was chasing anyone who wanted to leave Ethiopia without permission. And then I would like to mention one very important figure in our community. His name was Farada Aklum. He was a teacher, and he had some connection with figures in Israel, part of them also in the Mossad. And he was chased by the regime in Ethiopia because he was suspected that he has some connection with Mossad agent and things like that. And what he is doing, he's fleeing from Ethiopia and he's going to Sudan. And from Sudan, he had some connection with his friends in Israel, and he called them and asked them to take him out from Khartoum, from Sudan to Eretz Israel. And then there come the idea, if you cannot take the Jewish out from Ethiopia, maybe we can take them out from Sudan. And the reason for that is that in those days in Sudan, there was a big refugee camp, and a lot of people across Africa were coming to Sudan from different reasons. And the plan was that the Jews will be able to leave Ethiopia, to cross the border and to get to Sudan. And from Sudan, this is a pretty big country and the regime is not so control all the area. They will be able to take the Jewish, to take them out to the sea or to the desert. And this person, Farad Aklun, sends letters to his family and told them to come to Sudan, and from Sudan, the way to Israel is open. In the moment that the Jewish community in Ethiopia, we have to understand, we're talking about a dream that goes for a lot of years, and the mantra all the time was, one day we'll be able to come to Israel. And even the dangerous way that was to do the journey from Ethiopia to Sudan, and this is a journey that took something like a month to go from Ethiopia to Sudan. It's gonna take between 3 weeks to a month, and this is a very dangerous way because you have to hide during the day and walk only during the night. You have to cross the Ethiopian border and the Sudanese border, and to make sure not to be that no one will catch you during this journey. And eventually, we are talking about 1984, when Operation Moses was conducted. And during this journey, we are talking about a lot of people that coming to Sudan, and 8,000 people from the Jewish community were airlifted to Israel, whether through the sea or by airplanes. But in the same journey also, we're talking about around more than 3,000 Jewish people that were died during this journey. This happened through the journey itself or staying in the refugee camp inside Sudan with a lot of diseases. In what happened after that is that some figure in the Israeli politician announced to the press that the state of Israel is doing some effort to take out the Jews from Sudan. And Sudan, which is Arab country, when it was announced in the press, decided to close the way through Sudan, and the gate again were closed, and Jews were not able to go even through Sudan, and from Ethiopia they were not able to get out at all also. And this situation stays till 1991. So between 1984 and 1991, we're talking about a situation where families are separated from each other. And in 1991, there was Operation Solomon, where there was the people were asked to leave their villages and to come to the capital city of Addis Ababa. And from there, there was 35 non-stop flights of Israeli aircraft. And we're talking about that in 36 hours, more than 14,000 Jews were airlifted to Israel. And even there was a world record that, and it's worked like that. they took out all the chairs and just tell the people get to the airplane, and this is work like that. And we are talking about that in one of the lifted the world record of how many people you can put in one airplane was more than 1,088 people were airlifted in the same airplane, and even 2 babies were born during the flight. So this is so basically those are the 2 big operations that had to do with the airlifted of the Jewish community. One is 1984, and the second one is 1991. And here I would like to share with you my personal story in my relatives and uncles. They came to my father and told them, you know, the way to Eretz Israel, it's open and it's through Sudan. Would you like to join us to this journey? And my father, I think wisely decided that going to Sudan and doing this journey will be dangerous. And he decided to stay in Ethiopia. And my village in Macha that has 72 families, Jewish families, only left with 2 families, and the rest of the village left to Sudan. But in those days, I had twin brothers that they were very passionate about coming to Israel, and they wanted to go to Sudan to this journey. And after a lot of discussion, they decided to go to Sudan and to make the way to Israel. My family eventually, the rest of my family came to Israel in 1991, and I just cannot describe you the excitement and the excitement of the people to understand that dream of generation was finally fulfilled. And we saw people crying, and some of the people were kissing the land. And in the same moment, when we got to Israel in 1991, the only thing that we wanted is to meet our brothers. As I mentioned before, 2 of my brothers left to Sudan, and from the airport, we were taken to Markaz Klita, observation center, and eventually one of my brother is coming to meet us, and then my father asked him, where is your brother? Why? We're happy to see him, but we're asking him, where is the brother? And eventually, with the first day, our first day in Israel, we discovered that one of my brother was died from malaria in Sudan itself. And my second brother in some way got and was able to come to Israel. And when he came to Israel, he consulted my relatives here, my relatives in Israel, what to do, how I can send such a bad story to the rest of the family that left in Ethiopia. And they decided to do something that, because they were identical twin, they were send us picture of the same brother that survived, but with different clothes. And the moment we got to Israel, from one side, we were happy because we were able to fulfill the dream of the generation. And the other side, we understand what is the sacrifice that we had to do in order to get to Israel. And this is the moment where my father took all of my siblings and he told us that now you are in Israel and you are young and you can assimilate in the Israeli society. I am too old. my ability to get education and to understand Hebrew and to understand all the cultural difference, it's not so possible. And he said, we do a lot of in order to bring you here to Israel. Now it's your turn to get education, and you have to be like the Israeli. And this was the message. And he told us that being like the Israeli, it will go to acquiring education and to learn hard. And you can see here in this picture, this is the memorial place that exists in Har Herzl in Jerusalem for the victims of the people who didn't survive the journey through Sudan. And from there, for the first time, I eventually go to school and started from the beginning, started Ulpan. And very interesting, my father in Ethiopia, he was a traditional healer, meaning he know how with herb, he knows how to treat people. So I was exposed all the time to what is to take care of sick people and everything. And I decided that my goal would be to become a physician, and I graduated high school with success eventually. And after that, I went for the army and served 5 years in the army. I was an officer in the army, and eventually I was accepted to medical school. And this was very, in the graduation ceremony, we can see the two sides of, from one side, I saw my father, who is a traditional healer, and the other side, I saw myself as the representative of the modern medicine, let's see. But from time to time, I can hear his advice and understand that we don't know everything, and sometimes his advice are very informative to me also. And I completed my residency at so medical school in Israel. It's 6 years and another 1 year of internship, and then another 6 years of residency in Shaare Zedek Hospital in Jerusalem. And nowadays I'm here in Toronto for a 2 years fellowship in Canada. Very enjoying, and that's it. Thank you very much.
So I think we have some questions. Great, Heather, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. We do have some questions. Please keep them going. So I have a question. How many families, Dr. Getty, remain in Ethiopia? Jewish families remain in Ethiopia. Do you have any ideas?
Again, what's the question?
Sorry, the question is, how many families remain, Jewish families still remain in Ethiopia?
This is a good question, and we have to understand something. Majority of the Jewish community made Aliyah in the years that I mentioned before, and now there is another Jewish community that exists in Ethiopia, and those are what we are called Falashmora. Those are basically people who used to be Jewish, and then 100 years ago, from different reasons, they had to convert themselves, part of them, to become non-Jewish, and now they are returned to Judaism, and they have like a process to do in order to come to Israel. So there is a group of that in Gondar and in Addis Ababa, and there is like process to bring them. But this something that different in the Jewish community is that majority of the community, when they understand that there is way to come to Israel, all the people just come to Israel. This was really I think different. So today there is two communities in Addis Ababa and in Gondar that they are in this process of coming to Israel to do immigration to Israel.
Thank you. So we have another question. Where did the tradition of wearing white come from?
So white, I think, and comes from the notion of pure. I mentioned that before, that the Ethiopian Jews are basically following what's written in the Bible, and there a lot of that had to do with let's say a lot of Jewish villages were next to river because they have to go to the mikveh, and because of that, white is to present purity, and this is come from that.
Thank you. So we've got another question. It's a four-parter. So I'll break it up into little pieces for you. Where does Sheba, Queen of Ethiopia, and Solomon come in the story?
So this is the story of Queen Sheba and King Solomon appears in the Bible, as we know, in Sefer Melachim. And interestingly, the Ethiopian in general, not only the Jews, recognize themselves of being offspring of those relationship, and this is actually coming from the Christian identity of general of Ethiopia, and they relate themselves to the relationship that was between Queen Sheba and King Solomon. So this is the story where it's come to be relevant.
Thank you. The next part of the question from the same individual. I thought Dan was one of the last 10 tribes. Is there unique mitochondrial, is that how you pronounce it, DNA to suggest the difference with our Ashkenazi Cohens?
I don't have a good answer about the genetic, but the recognition between the Ethiopian Jews and the tribe of Dan, it's coming from a rabbi that was in Egypt in the 15th century. His name was Rabbi David Ben Zimra, and he wrote what called Shoot. It's like answers, question and answers, and he mentioned in his book a story about person who was kidnapped from Ethiopia and was brought to Egypt, and then there was a discussion whether to consider this Ethiopian, the Jewish Ethiopian in Egypt, whether he is Jewish or not, and he's mentioned about the connection that exists, and he says that those people are coming from the tribe of Dan. So this is the source who in the 15th centuries that relate those things between the Jewish Ethiopian and the tribe of Dan. So this has come from there.
Right. And the third question, there's a myth of 10 commandments in a church in Ethiopian. Any validity from your community?
Again, I didn't understand the question, sorry.
There's a myth of the Ten Commandments, and there's a myth that there's the Ten
Yeah.
Commandments in a church in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
In Ethiopia, sorry. Any validity from your community?
No, to my knowledge, we don't recognize, and at least I don't know about the relation about the Ten Commandment that exists about that, but there is stories about some church that exists, and there is the Ten Commandments over there, but I don't know if the story is true or not.
Thank you. Another question. How would you describe religious observance, culture, and practice in your Ethiopian village prior to the community's departure from Israel, to Israel?
You know, in Ethiopia, I think there is couple differences. First of all, in Ethiopia, there is no a notion, or there is no any situation where you are Jewish and you are not religious. This is something that we have to understand. And this is the reason why the Jewish choose to live separate in their community and itself in order to keep their identity. The meaning of that is, if you leave the village and go to live in the city, sometimes the meaning of that is you are no longer belong to the community, and maybe you are not Jewish anymore. This is the understanding. And also in Ethiopia, of course, this is a patriarchal traditional way of things, where the parents are most important. And in Israel, it's a bit different. And when we had Aliyah to Israel, in the beginning, it's really make a big discussion between, let's say, our parents' generation, where they continue to keep their tradition, how they practice in Ethiopia, and the different way we discover that the Israel, the things are doing. I can bring some example. Let's say in Ethiopia, we kept Pesach, and Pesach, they eat only matzah, and that's it. And another example, it's in Shabbat, we're not able, you are not allowed to eat something that is hot, you know, or something like that. Only cold water, because the cold food, because there is no electricity, so we don't have, you know, Plato and things like that. So my parents continue to eat only cold stuff during Shabbat, and not to use all the new technology in order to make the food hot or something like that. Those are a big differences. And in the beginning, it's, I think even today, there is some struggle between our rabbis, the Kisim, where the Rabbanut in Israel doesn't recognize the legitimacy of being the representative of the Jewish community. And on the other side, we have the rabbis, and this is make really some difficulty among the old generation of our parents and the new generation that is in Israel.
Thank you. So some of the questions that are coming in, I'm going to kind of group together because they're kind of similar. So a big question that's been coming up is, are you comfortable discussing the absorption process of the Ethiopian community and the acceptance of your community within Israel?
I want to share with you one story. So I was working as on call in the hospital at the Shaarei Tzedek, and I was sitting in the department, as you see, with the uniform and everything, and and then come a patient to the room, and he was sent to look after Dr. Getty. That it happened to be me, and he was entering the room. He's opening the door, and he is asking me that, looking. I have the uniform and everything, and he asking me, "I'm looking for Dr. Getty," and then this has come to the understanding of what is your assumptions and what you have in your head, when you are talking about physician. And in the same time, what was I'm doing? I told them, let's look together after Dr. Getty, and then I show him my tag that says, I'm Dr. Getty. And then there is, and this is had to do with the observation in the beginning of that we have still a lot of efforts to do, because we are the first generation, my generation, we are the first generation that accept education and trying to assimilate in the Israeli society. So in regarding to that, I think there is things that we're trying to do in order to be part of the Israeli society itself.
Thank you. Another question was, have you ever seen the French movie Live and Become? If yes, was it an accurate account? It depicts some lack of acceptance by some of the Orthodox community. How was your experience in settling in Israel?
I don't familiar with the movie. Sorry, but I think I mentioned that before regarding to the discussion that was in the recognition of us as Jewish like any other community, and this is something that still I think hurts some of the people, because we're talking about a community that for many years done so many efforts in order to keep her identity as a Jewish, and then there is some someone came and tell maybe you're not, and all this question make some uncomfortable among the Jewish community, the Ethiopian Jewish community, and this is really in discussion that's still going on. But we have to understand, I think eventually, that as a Jewish in general, there is different kinds of practice in Jewish and different kind of Jewish, and we are eventually coming from the same source. This is the way I see it.
Thank you. The next question is that you mentioned the holiday of Sig. What other customs and traditions do you, your family, and other Ethiopian Jewish community continue to practice today? In your experience, how are they received by the broader Israeli community?
First of all, I mentioned Sigd, which is today announced as official holiday in Israel. And this is celebrated 15 days after Yom Kippur. And the last year, there is more and more exposure, I think, to this Chag and the meaning of that. And this is in the same way that other Jewish community has other different, let's say, in the coming Pesach, we have in the end of Pesach, we have the Memuna that is celebrated by the Moroccan community, and they bring something interesting also. I think that Chag HaSigd also have something unique to contribute also to the Jewish world, I think. And this is one thing. And another thing that I think it's important and coming from our tradition, it's the way that we respect older people and the way we respect our fathers and grandfathers. And this is something very basically. In Ethiopia, when I met my father after a long day, I was kissing his legs. Was part of the respect to him. Of course, we're not doing that anymore in Israel, but this is that show the meaning of to be respect to older people that are not so practiced in Israel with the with the Israeli chutzpah that it's make it a bit different to continue. But we have it as sometimes I act differently when I'm with my family compared with when I'm outside, let's say, with the Israeli society in general. But every person comes with his tradition, and I think every one of us had something to contribute, and we can learn from each other. I think the good things and maybe and this is very important.
I have another question. Now that you're in Canada, what is the Ethiopian Jewish community experience like for you here?
I live in Thornhill, where there is a Jewish community here, and this is really wonderful and very nice. And actually, in the beginning, we thought it's going to be really hard to be here in Canada because of we're a religious family and with all the kashrut and things like that. And we discovered this is very convenient here and very nice. And really welcoming here the community, and we are very happy here doing our 2 years here, and finally I hope, and after that we're going back to Israel to my position in my hospital in Shaare Zedek. And this is we are here with our 6 kids, so we have like a big family coming with us. And we are really enjoying here.
Great. Any other questions? Please feel free to put them in the chat. Somebody wanted to know, where do your kids go to school and what are their ages?
Okay. So they go in the Tivot, it's called, in Thornhill, and my oldest, she's 14, and the youngest, she's 4 years old. So, and my wife, she's doing a postdoc here. So both of us are pretty busy. I'm all the time in the hospital, so my wife, she's doing everything. I don't know how, but she's able to manage 6 kids and to do postdoc. I don't know how, but eventually it works.
And what is she doing her postdoc in? Was the next question.
She's doing in Women's College Hospital. She is in the area of psychiatric. She's dealing with mental issues of postpartum depression and research in this area. This is something she was doing in the Hebrew University in Israel, and she continued here in Canada also.
And are your siblings still in Israel? And how are your siblings doing in Israel?
So all my siblings are in Israel, and regarding to that, we mentioned before about difficulty of immigration, and we have to understand that immigration comes also with difficulty, and we can say that part of them were able to be like to get education, to be part of Israel, and part of them are still struggling with the issue of new immigrant that comes to new country. And but Baruch Hashem, everyone is in Israel, and
Great. Well, thank you very, very much. So, Dr. Getty, thank you for this wonderful and powerful presentation tonight. If I had closed my eyes, I would have felt that I was walking alongside you on your journey from Ethiopia to Israel to Canada. Your personal pictures and slides really helped to illustrate the path that your family took and gave me, and I'm sure our congregation, a better understanding of the Ethiopian experience from its past to the present and hopefully the future. On behalf of the Beth David community, thanks for taking time from your busy schedule and your family. We really appreciate it. Thank you for this wonderful evening.
thank you very much.